you miss me? I've been out of it comatose, but the depression.
Hello and welcome to Controlled Burns, the Hobby List podcast from me, your host, Andrew Burns, or SlowBurne from Wildfire Gaming. I know it's been a bit of a hiatus for the podcast, definitely the longest one that we've had up to this point, and that's just because of just get kind of in just a busy period in my life. My wife Reagan has gotten this job that requires her to drive down to the coast, the Texas coast. We live kind of in the DFW area. And so she hasn't been available to be on the podcast. And then whenever she has been around, I've been wanting to spend more time with her because we've been spending more time apart because of this temporary arrangement. And it just hasn't left as much time for the podcast. I've been wanting to do one with her about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the show, as we've talked about the book. And I want to do it kind of our typical compare and contrast thing, but we just haven't had the time. And I've decided that in lieu of that, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do this episode today, which I'm planning on breaking into a two-part series, ranking my favorite Survivor players of all time. This is the U.S. television show Survivor. I'm not taking into account Australian Survivor or any of the other spin-offs of Survivor that exist. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my history with the show today, and then I'm going to talk about the survivors that I would rank as my top 25. I guess really I don't need to go into my history of the show because I kind of covered that on the last episode of the podcast, which was also Survivor centered, which was my Dreamcast for Survivor season 50. The season is ongoing right now. As I record this, I have seen the first 3 episodes, I think, and I know another episode has aired. But that's another situation where I haven't been watching them live. I actually don't think I have the ability to watch them live anymore. A few years ago, I was able to watch seasons live when they aired just through my a subscription that I had to CBS All Access, which has now been folded into Paramount Plus. But now I guess they want you to pay for like a higher tier if you want to watch live television. So that's absurd. I'm certainly not going to do that. I don't even pay for this right now. I just have it through my wife's family. But anyway, so we've been watching as they air generally, just not live on Wednesday nights. And also because Reagan has been in and out of the house going down to work, we haven't been able to watch them necessarily right when they air. So I am missing out on the most recent one, which I believe is the fifth elimination. I don't know who was eliminated fifth. But I've seen the first 4 eliminations, first 3 episodes, and I'm enjoying it. Okay, I really dislike the celebrity aspect that they're bringing to it, which apparently is a big aspect of the new episode, and I'm not thrilled about that. I think it's really cringe. As a matter of fact, almost as cringe as that terrible rap that Jeff Probst did. Anyway, I've been watching the show, and since we're already kind of on a Survivor theme, I've been a little bit more than usual Survivor top of mind because Reagan and I were trying to cram in the 40s so that we could catch up to season 50, which we failed. Ultimately, we have seen all of them now except for 48 and 49, which of course have now been spoiled for us because the winners of 48 and 49 were on this season, unfortunately. But anyway, that's kind of, we've been watching a lot of Survivor, and so it's just left me thinking about who I consider to be the greatest survivors of all time. Reagan and I have, ever since we started watching the show together, which goes back to early in our relationship in 2021, we have maintained our own list. Just like every time somebody gets voted off, we give them a tier, and we rank the cast for each season, which, I guess that's like a whole other gigantic series that I could do if I really wanted to, going into ranking the Survivor casts for each season. If I wanted to have a Survivor specific podcast for like a year or longer, probably not going to do that anytime soon, but that is something that we have. That is data that we have. And from that, I've just kind of been curating a list of my top 50, and maybe even going to, I really have a list of my top 100. I don't know if we're going to go that deep on the podcast. It kind of remains to be seen. But another impetus here was actually going back toward the beginning of my website, the Soundtrack Online. One of the first articles that I wrote was a ranking of the top 50 Survivor players. And it's actually become one of my most successful articles that I've ever written, probably ever realistically, but certainly for the soundtrack online, it has over 10,000 views. The thing about that list is I wrote it in 2016. I very strongly disagree with the list that I put together to the point where it's been mostly scrubbed from the website as I have been writing over it to do the updated list of my top 50. And I think really what that comes down to is I just have a very different criteria than I had at that time. First of all, it was outdated just in the sense that I didn't update it since 2016. So any of the Survivor seasons, of which there were many, into the teens that released since then were not included. But also, I think at that time, whenever I wrote that, I was kind of trying to be a little bit more objective and like look at how long they played the game and what their success rate was. And so it was very winner heavy and things of that nature. Whereas I realize now that that's just a really boring way to do a survivor list. I mean, you could do it that way, and that is sort of like an interesting list in its own right. But this time, I decided to swing much more heavily into just my favorites, the people that I was the most entertained by, and that's pretty much it. Like I didn't take into account like really what their success rate was or how many times they played or anything like that. So, I mean, I guess I maybe took that into account to a small degree, but for the most part, this is a list based on how entertaining they were. And I think that's just kind of makes for a more fun list. It's definitely more catered to taste, so you're going to get a little bit more flavor of how I feel about Survivor players and kind of what my taste is in Survivor players. So that's what we have on the docket for today. We're just going to be doing the top 25 today because I haven't actually finished the list on my website as I record this. I'm up to 33, but I am going to do the top 50 to replace the old list. Right now, it's actually the website the article is just kind of like in this weird hodgepodge middle where it's like under construction since it's something that I had already published, and I just figured out since it's such a successful article I'd keep the URL and everything the same there'll be 10,000 people have read this, so I don't want to like just get completely eliminate it from the internet, especially considering how much more successful it is than the majority of the stuff that I put on the site. So I'm just updating it, and that's a work in progress. But I've done the top 25, so I can reveal those picks to you today. And then you can also go onto the website yourself, thesoundtrackonline.com, and take a look at them. Before we go any further, just a reminder that ControlledBurnes is a weekly hobby list podcast. Well, not weekly, obviously, at this point, but it's a hobby list podcast with a particular focus on lists and topics related to video games, music, TV, and film, as well as other hobbies and aspects of pop culture. If you're interested in writing into the podcast and having your comments or questions read on air, you can write into the podcast at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. Let me know who your favorite Survivor players are and what you think of the current season if you're a Survivor fan. But let's get into the list here with the top 25. I don't think I'm going to expound too far on each player. I think we're just going to keep it pretty lean here and have maybe a little bit of a snappier podcast than what we're used to here on the show. Starting with number 25, where I ranked Courtney Yates from Survivor China, season 15, where she was the runner-up. Also, she was on Heroes vs. Villains, where she finished 11th, and so that left her with a total days played of 64. There's a lot of reasons that I really get a kick out of Courtney. She's definitely in the race for the greatest Survivor player on the mic. She's right at the beginning of her first season. I mean, she's just mercilessly mocking these very serious Chinese rites that the survivors were put through at the introduction of the season. They were trying to make it very serious. One person took it so seriously they had to walk out because they felt that it was like in contrast to their Christian faith. And another person with like a Chinese heritage was like driven to tears about this. Courtney just thinks it is so ridiculous. She's so annoyed about all the crap that they're having to go through. It was just a tour de force of entertainment in that segment, and it continued throughout the entire season amazingly, because I don't think Courtney was one that maybe you would have pegged as making it to the end of the game and actually being the runner-up of the season. But there was she had all kinds of just hilarious storylines going on in the show. Probably most notably was just this open war that she had with the kind of season's antagonist, which was John Robert. She ended up having this fling with this 20-year-old kid, Frosty. That was very interesting, and just kept this incredibly bitchy attitude all the way to the final tribal council, where she actually ended up as the runner-up of the season ahead of Amanda Kimmel, who definitely had probably could have won mini seasons. She had enough winning equity to have an argument at least to win the game. So it was just a total crazy kind of an example, I guess, of failing upward in a way. But she did legitimately have good bonds with people that were the, sort of the movers and shakers of the game. So, more power to her. It was an all-timer of a performance on an individual Survivor season that would be tough to replicate, but she was also, I would say, almost as entertaining on Heroes versus Villains, even though she didn't last quite as long. She had this chaotic allegiance with Sandra, who, of course, ultimately went on to win the season. And she didn't get as much time on the screen with that season just because obviously there was like so much competition for screen time in Heroes vs. Villains, being the greatest cast that the show's ever put together. But the time that she is there was super memorable and entertaining. And then when she was voted out as the, I think, second member of the jury, she ended up becoming the front woman of this band that she formed with Coach and JT on Ponderosa called the Dragons, which was easily just the most entertaining Ponderosa arc that the show ever produced by far. And it's like borderline required Survivor viewing. If you have not seen it, you have to go on YouTube and take a look at that because it is pure gold. So I absolutely love Courtney. I would have loved to see her come back for season 50, which we talked about on the last episode, but she's number 25 here on this list. At number 24, this is an interesting one. This is Sierra Easton, who of course played originally on season 27 Blood versus Water, finishing 5th. She came back on season 31 Cambodia, which was also called Second Chance, where she finished 10th. And then of course she came on season 34 Game Changers, where she came in last place. She was the first person voted off. So she has a total days played of 66. And Sierra's an interesting one, and I think a lot of what I like about her is just how important she was to that season of Blood versus Water and making it a very memorable, very strong season of Survivor, I would argue. In every season, there are contestants who make alliances where they're the bottom, and they ultimately get eliminated before the end because they didn't think far enough ahead, and that was the case with Sierra. And she seemed like she was destined to be one of those players where she was aligned with Tyson and Jervis and Monica, and obviously she was number 4 out of that group. And but when she realized that, rather than accepting her fate, she forced a rock draw, which was actually the most in danger that Tyson ever was on his way to winning that season, because he legitimately had to draw a rock, and I think it was like a 1 in 3 chance that he was going home. And so it was like a super, just like grit your teeth moment, like super high stakes, and could have really changed the course of the season. It didn't work out for her, because her ally, I forget that girl's name. It was Tina's daughter, very forgettable person. Ended up drawing the wrong walk, and so she ended up actually being voted out 5th. So she really probably could have gotten even further if she hadn't done that. And in modern seasons, being 4th place is kind of good enough if you're in a alliance, because you at least are going to make it to the fire making challenge, which of course wasn't a thing back in Blood versus Water. So under the modern version of the game, like, she probably never would have betrayed her alliance because of just kind of the dumb way that they do the Final Four now. But because of the way they did it back then, it created such an iconic moment, and it was just a really strong moment of Survivor, I think, and a really strong character moment for her. She came back on Cambodia, and she was definitely overshadowed by her kind of partner in crime on that season, which was Kelly Wentworth. But she was still a critical piece of that puzzle. She didn't have the flashy idol plays, but she was, kind of in the mix. And I think when you combine, her resume from Blood versus Water with what she was able to do in Cambodia, I think that actually, for me, that actually puts her ahead of Kelly Wentworth. I think that's probably kind of a controversial opinion. Most people would probably put Kelly Wentworth above Sierra, but Kelly Wentworth was not ever as important to a season as Sierra was to Blood versus Water. And I haven't even mentioned it yet, but kind of her most famous move on Blood versus Water was the fact that she voted out her own mom, which was Laura Moret from season 19. I have a soft spot in my heart for her because she was from my original season. But that was something that she did too, where she realized that her mom was kind of an anchor weighing her down in the way that things were playing out in that season. She voted her ass off. And that's how you play the game to win, but it also kind of, I guess, puts a little bit of a target on your back. And it made it hard to recapture the magic on, so especially when she came back for Game Changers, where it was like, I think that was legitimately part of the reason that they decided to vote her off, because they were like, well, she stirred up all this trouble at Cambodia. She wrote off or voted off her own mom on Blood versus Water. We got to get rid of this woman. And, that's what they did. So they voted her off. And so sadly, her last appearance was one of abject failure. But those first two appearances, particularly that first appearance, was so strong that I've got to give her credit as number 24 on this list. Up at number 23, we have Jonathan Penner, who was originally on season 13 Cook Islands, the race divided season, where he finished seventh place. He was on season 16 Fans versus Favorites, where he finished 15th place because of a medical evacuation. And then they brought him back on season 25 Philippines, where he finished seventh place again for a total number of 81 days played. He wasn't, with Jonathan, he's kind of an interesting one. He was never necessarily the most charismatic player. He definitely never had a flawless game plan. And I think that he kind of lacked some of the killer instinct that many of the most successful Survivor players had. But I always thought that he was really interesting player. He was a very thoughtful player that did kind of know and understand and make moves to sort of compensate for the mistakes that he always made. I mean, all three of his games, he was somebody that made mistakes, but he was able to sort of compensate for them to a certain point until, of course, it caught up with him, and he was voted off in the jury phase of Cook Islands and Philippines. And all of his seasons, to kind of, I guess, go deeper into what I'm talking about with the mistakes that he made. He made these kind of blunders that seemed like he would sink him, like whenever he betrayed his alliance in the Cooks alongside Candace, he only to go to a tribe that also, didn't really care about him. He alienated Suri in Fans versus Favorites, which was a huge mistake because she was definitely the one that was sort of the fulcrum on which the game swung. In the early stages of that season. And then he had this weird rivalry with Jeff Kent. I'm not even really sure what he did to piss Jeff Kent off, but Jeff Kent was definitely going to be a problem for him in that season. But every time he kind of rebounded and survived another week or two before, ultimately going down. And he always it always seemed like it was harder to get rid of him than you would think based on the decisions that he made in the game. Maybe my favorite aspect about his approach to the game is just his composure, which was definitely tested all three times that he played. I mean, in the first season, he was so hated by the White People Alliance, if I'm being frank, with Parvati and Candace and whatever that guy's name was, Adam, I think, because he went back on his deal with them whenever he realized that Yule had the immunity idol. He took a lot of verbal abuse from them, but he always just remained composed. Kind of same thing in Philippines. He was anybody on Philippines was kind of tested with Abby Maria out there, and then also just kind of some of the yahoos that he had on that red tribe that was kind of a mess of a tribe. But he was able to always maintain his composure. But regardless of how much his tribe mates hated him and how many times he screwed up, he never really lost his cool. I guess the closest he came was whenever he got into an argument with Suri in Fans versus Favorites, but it was still pretty tame as far as Survivor arguments go. And he certainly always retained the ability to play rationally, which I think is a great trait for any Survivor player, and it certainly kept him in the mix probably long after it should have in all of his seasons. So really enjoyed Jonathan Penner, another one that would have been great to see come back on season 50, but that's kind of the case for all of these, of course. Moving on to number 22, this is kind of a controversial player, I suppose, depending on how you feel about early Survivor, but this is Lex Vandenberg, who was played all the way back in season 3 Africa, where he finished in third, and then in season 8 All Stars, the original All Stars returning players season, where he finished ninth place for a total of 65 days played. Lex is really interesting because in the much less strategic world of old school Survivor in the early 2000s, he was, and I would argue, nearly a peerless strategist. He was, which bordered on paranoia at times, particularly in Africa, and that could have. I really think that if things would have just gone slightly differently, not even wildly differently, I think that Lex could have very easily become the game's first ever two-time winner. I mean, all he needed to do was win the final immunity challenge of Africa, which he failed to do. But if he had done that and gotten rid of Ethan, he definitely would have won that season, I think. And then he made a fatal mid-game mistake, of course, legendarily so, in the middle of All Stars. And I think that he was well on his way to winning that season as well. When he wasn't letting paranoia get the best of him, as he did in kind of the latter half of Africa after he received a stray vote from T-Bird and thought it was Kelly, I think was that blonde girl's name. He was generally a cool, calculated, deliberate player, particularly in All Stars, willing to vote out, not only his friends, like Ethan, which he did in All Stars, but actually he would do this thing where he would like front side him instead of blind side him. In Survivors, typically it's the blind side. You don't want people to know that they're going home before you vote them off. But he would tell them ahead of time, like, hey, I'm sorry, man, but I'm going to have to get rid of you. And like he would explain his rationale for why he was doing that, which is a really risky way to play, but it was definitely working for him in All Stars. It's kind of a situation that it wouldn't work today, but it was with the way that Survivor was in the early stages of the game back in the 2000s. It was something that was a viable strategy, and it was one that he kind of did unlike anybody else at that time. His All Star game in particular, to me, is maybe just his greatest what if scenario. Maybe the greatest what if scenario in the history of the game. He was just dominating the early stage of the game on the Mogo Mogo tribe. He was voting off threats like Colby and Ethan while surrounding himself with weaker players that he knew he could beat in the end, like Kathy and Sheehan and Jerry. And if he would have kept on that path, I don't think there's any question that he would have won that game. But ultimately, he let his heart get in the way of the game when he saved Boston Rob's girlfriend Amber, and then was promptly betrayed by Rob the next episode and became the first member of the jury. And from all accounts, he's never been the same since. He's like definitely held a grudge, and that's kind of one of those things about early survivors. Like it was just so serious to them. It was like real life. And a betrayal like that was just like devastating. It was life changing, life altering. And I can understand because whenever you recognize that what he lost, the $1 million, but also just the title of winning the original All Star season, ultimately for having a heart and kind of trying to help somebody out beyond the sort of the confines of the game, it leads to a bitterness that you just don't get from today's game. So I just think that Lex is a very interesting character in the history of Survivor. He's the ultimate what if character, and he's never come back since All Stars, which I think is a shame. I would have certainly loved to see him return. Number 21 on this list is Yul Kwan, the winner, the first winner that we're going to be talking about today. Winner of season 13 Cook Islands, and then he returned on season 40 Winners at War, where he came in 14th place, but because of the Edge of Extinction on Winners at War, he has played a total of 74 days. He played one of the most dominant games I think that the history of Survivor has ever had. He had a lot of things working for him. He has extremely high intelligence, a absolutely brutally overpowered hidden immunity idol that he never even had to play, and then of course just as a power of persuasion. All of those kind of combined to create that dominant game that he played in the Cook Islands. He was definitely the first person to play the game to effectively utilize the hidden immunity idol as a bargaining chip. Granted, this was only the third season that the hidden immunity idol existed, but he used it as like a, hey, I have this, let's work together and maybe we can use this in a way that benefits us both. He was able to do that to sway Jonathan Pinner to aid his super underdog tribe of 4, which was going up against a group of 8. And that was a key turning point for the game, was his ability to get Jonathan to come back over to his side. And then once Jonathan had served his purpose, Yul got rid of him. I mean, it was very Machiavellian of him, but he just kind of had this air of class about him where, people like Jonathan weren't bitter about it. His game was obviously so good that he was able to beat Ozzy, one of the most beloved to ever play the game, in the final immunity vote. Ozzy made it to the end of the game with Yul, which Yul did not really want to happen, but he just couldn't stop him. And I still think to this day that vote reveal between Yul and Ozzy, who's the winner of the game, it came down to one vote, was the most anticipated and just sort of tension-heavy vote read of all time. Both players, I think, thought that they were going to be the winner, and so it was definitely a devastating loss for Ozzy and a relieving win for Yul. Like most of the all-time greats that appeared on Winners at War, his time of the game was tragically short, but it was still a delight to see him return, over a decade since he had won his season. And, even though it didn't work out for him, I think that he showed in Winners at War that, obviously still in great shape, had the chops to hang in there with the evolution of the game. Just the cards were not in his favor on that season, but it's great to see him return. I'm really glad that they did that, and still an iconic winner. And we're going from him to another iconic winner on this list, number 20, which is Tom Westman, who is the winner of season 10 Palau, and also returned for season 20 Heroes versus Villains, where he came in 16th place for a total number of 53 days played. He has a reputation for being one of the winners with the cleanest sort of records, one of the cleanest styles of play. But what's interesting is I never really thought of him that way. I remember the first time that I saw his season, I was actually kind of upset with Tom, the way that he was able to manipulate Ian, who at that time was my favorite on the season, into throwing his game away by jumping off that pier in what was the longest immunity challenge of all time, the final challenge of the season between Tom and Ian. But looking back, with all of my just time I've spent watching the game, a ridiculous amount of time, I could see that his ability to manipulate the weaker people around him was really his greatest strength. He was I think the greatest leader that we've ever seen on Survivor. On his tribe Karor, he went out of his way to check in with every player on the tribe every day, which is an effort that is, I guess, it doesn't sound that difficult, but it's apparently easier said than done, just because clearly the majority of the people who play the game don't do that. And his leadership was reflected in the tribe's results as, of course, the only tribe in Survivor history to completely overpower the other, ultimately eliminating it completely, and resulting in the only mergeless game that Survivor has ever seen, because there was only one person left, Stephanie, and Karor just sort of absorbed them. And then, thanks to the groundwork that he laid in the early game, he didn't really need to turn to the dirty tricks that were utilized by some of the more iconic winners of the season, like Boston Rob and Tony Blatchos, and because he already had things well in hand without them. And it's a style of play that is really interesting to me. It's almost unheard of today, just because of how dynamic the game is. But for the way that Survivor was played in the early days, it was really a masterclass. He had a brief stint on Heroes versus Villains, sadly brief, but he did show that he had some new school chops in that season. He took advantage of a split vote and an idle play to eliminate Suri, which is like, he's like the only person that's ever been able to eliminate Suri early in the game, unless things go south for her here in season 50, after correctly identifying her as the biggest threat on the tribe. But of course, ultimately, it was JT who was very wishy-washy that season. Ended up being Tom's downfall. But that's probably something that JT regrets, because it's you got to wonder how differently that game might have gone if they would have kept Tom Westman around. But just an iconic winner, one of my favorite players to ever play the game. Number 19, we have Spencer Bledsoe, who was the fourth place finisher on season 28 Cagayan, and then he was the runner-up on season 31 Second Chance, for a total days played of 73. I think one thing that's kind of interesting about Spencer is Jeff Probst famously was not a fan of Spencer during the initial casting period of Cagayan, which really ought to be a red flag regarding his ability to be in charge of casting. But he definitely won me over very early during his time in Cagayan. One thing that was just so amazing about watching Spencer play that game was just how many close calls he had. He just kept barely squeaking through, and really that happened for him very similarly in Cambodia, because it was a very similar situation. Of it seemed like he was doomed multiple times, but his powers of persuasion just was able to just help him just barely squeak through. My ballpark guess is about 15 times that happened across the two seasons. Things just never really seemed to be going his way, but through willpower, a penchant for last-ditch speeches, depth positioning, he just managed to hang in there until the final episode of both seasons. I would argue that he played the better game in Second Chance, maybe the best game out of everybody out there, except for maybe Kelly Wentworth, of course, they got rid of before they went to the final vote. And I wish that he would have gotten the nod on that season instead of Jeremy. I think a lot of the vote for Jeremy ended up coming down to he play the family card, and that's very effective with sort of manipulating people to vote for you on Survivor, as we have seen numerous times. But then again, taking Jeremy to the end was a foolish error on Spencer's part, and you could argue that that is worthy of costing him the title. So it depends on how you look at it there. But he'd make a top tier candidate in the event that Survivor ever put together a season of Survivor finalists, which I think is an interesting idea that they definitely should pursue at some point. People who made it to the final vote but did not win the game. But even if we never see him again, I think he has the legacy of one of the most brilliant players in the show's history and one of the most psychologically interesting characters in the history of the show as well. At number 18, we have my number one draft pick for women that I would have liked to see on season 50. If you remember from that list, this is also the first person on this list that we're going to be talking about today that only played once. This is Shambo from Survivor Samoa season 19. She came in sixth place and has played the game for 36 days in that one season. I love Shambo. She was my obviously. I've mentioned earlier that Samoa was my first Survivor season, so there's no question that I have a soft spot for basically everybody that was on that season, but Shambo in particular because her role in that season was just so ridiculously entertaining as the outlier of the Laura Moret's kind of Galoo clique, which Shambo called the 90210 or whatever. That's I mean I don't really get that reference because I didn't watch that crap. But anyway, the sort of the Mean Girls or whatever. And then so she was the outcast of there. Later on in the season, the guys of that tribe tried to manipulate her to by making her the leader. That was like this weird mechanic in that season where they had an actually appointed leader, trying to keep her loyal to the tribe. It was a smart move, but it didn't work because she flipped over to the Foa 4 anyway after Russell Hantz gave her the opening to take out Laura, who was just her biggest nemesis. And it just results in one of the most entertaining and all-time great character arcs in Survivor history, in my opinion. She had the goods when it came to the confessionals and could stand toe-to-toe with anybody on the mic. And that includes Coach, Shane, some of the great, Courtney, some of the greatest of all time. I think the editors of that show knew they had gold with Shambo, and there was like several memorable sequences with her, like where she loses the fishing gear, or where she has the dream about voting off Dave Paul, and they like actually had like video footage of her having this dream. It's so ridiculous. And I understand they did try to get her to come back on subsequent seasons, but Shambo refused. So then again, hard to blame her. How can you improve on perfection? And Shambo Waters is perfection. So she's my number 18 on this list. Number 17 is JT from, of course, the winner of season 18, Token Sheens, the 10th place finisher of Heroes versus Villains season 20. And then he came in 16th place on season 34, Game Changers, for a total number of 79 days played. Even though JT was a very dominant winner, he really wasn't the most strategic winner in Survivor history. He had this alliance with Stephen Fishbach, who he completely decimated in the final vote, sweeping the jury and ultimately becoming the first, or having the first perfect game in the history of the show, in the sense that he did not receive any votes against him over the course of the season and then received every vote to win the game. And the only other person that has ever done that is John Cochran. And, he was just kind of at that time considered one of the most lovable contestants in the show's rich history. He was so beloved during that season that he had other players literally strategizing how they were going to be able to push him forward in the game at their own expense, which I don't think I've ever seen that before. And, had he stopped there, never played again after Token Jeans, he'd probably still be remembered as one of the all-time greats in terms of just like great winners in the history of the show, even more so than he is. But I'm personally thrilled that he returned because I actually think that he was even more entertaining in Heroes versus Villains. Obviously, it did not work out for him in that season. He was kind of made out to be a fool by Parvati and Russell after he made what was really a ballsy move that obviously didn't work out whenever he gave Russell his hidden immunity idol to use against somebody who ended up actually was in his alliance in Parvati. But, gosh, that ended up being, kind of lampooned as a dumb decision, and they voted him off at the beginning of the merge. But really, even that I don't think that tarnished his legacy as much as the mess that he produced in Game Changers, where he single-handedly ruined the game of his greatest ally in Malcolm Freeberg early in the game, and then that led to him heading out the door just one episode later, just because he foolishly trusted whatever that guy's name was, Culpepper, Brad Culpepper. So yeah, it turns out winning's not so easy when you aren't surrounded by people trying to hand you the money. But just as on the personality level, the wishy washiness that he had in Heroes versus Villains was so entertaining, kind of like the more villainous turn that he had that season. And then of course just kind of how badass he was in Togechi's, which is of course just a ludicrously entertaining season anyway. He's been on two of literally the top five seasons in the history of the show. So that definitely boosts him up quite a bit. And he has earned the number 17 spot on this list. Up at number 16, we have Eric Reichenbach, the fifth place finisher, both seasons that he played, both of the Fans versus Favorites. He was in season 16, Fans versus Favorites, and season 26, Fans versus Favorites 2, returning as a favorite, having go make the transition from fan to favorite for a total number of days played at 72. He was dubbed the Ice Cream Scooper from Hell by Jeff Probst. And he definitely is just one of my favorite Survivor contestants. He's a strategic player, which of course is what I was considering on last time I made this list. He had a lot of wrinkles. He obviously made what is routinely called the dumbest move in Survivor history when he gave up his hidden, or his not hidden, his very non-hidden immunity necklace to the, as they called it, all-devouring female alliance, what led by Parvati and Suri and Amanda, which of course earned him a seat on the jury and 1 million reasons for regret. At the same time, though, if you think about it, really Eric was a legitimate threat to win both seasons that he was on. It's often overlooked that the reason that the women of the Black Widow Brigade hatched such a desperate scheme to try to trick him into giving them his necklace in the first place was because they couldn't beat him any other way, and they knew that he was going to be a threat to win the game if he made it to the end. And then you look at kind of how bitter the Fans versus Favorites 2 jury was. I really think he certainly would have at least peeled some votes away from Cochran if he would have made it to the end, and I think that he would have been a threat to actually win, considering what just the makeup of the jury. He definitely wouldn't deserve to win, but I think that he would have been a threat to make it had he taken Dawn's place, or I guess it was a final three with that other lady who nobody remembers. Sadly, he was medevaced on Fans vs. Favorites 2, so we'll never know exactly what would have happened there. But I think it's very safe to say that if he would have made it to the end, Cochran would not have had a perfect win. But either way, 72 days on Survivor, hell of an achievement. He was definitely nowhere near as entertaining the second time out as he was the first time. But gosh, that time that he was on the first time, just all of the scenarios that he was in, he kind of had a little bit of a Spencer in him where he was just like barely squeaking by many votes. And just the sort of naive nature that he had about him was so entertaining up against some of the all-time greats in that season. And the fact that he outlasted so many of them was also just fantastic. Just total gold the entire time. So he's number 16 on this list. Number 15, we have we're getting into some legendary air here. Number 15 is Rob Cesternino, of course, the third place finisher of season 6, The Amazon, and 15th place finisher of season 8, All Stars, for a total number of 50 days played. Rob C is kind of an interesting case because, on one hand, time has been very kind to him. He's become one of the most prolific Survivor contestants of all time due to his popular podcast. Rob has a podcast, active social media presence, and in a way, he's kind of almost transcended the game that made him famous, that he played in Survivor Amazon. But you also can kind of look at it where time has been a little bit detrimental to him, considering that at the time that he played, he was considered maybe the greatest person to ever play the game, certainly the greatest person to ever play the game and not win during that time. As a result, he came into All Stars with a huge target on his back, nearly equal to that of the winners, which came with gigantic targets on their backs. And that all kind of came down to what he was definitely a game changer in the game, and his sort of innovation was sort of engineering this idea of the alliance flip, where the ability to flip back and forth between multiple alliances multiple times, and then also the goat drag, where he was trying to take Matt von Ertfelda, his partner in crime, if you want to look at it that way, to the end with him, knowing that no one was gonna vote for him. Um, so it almost worked out for him in that season. Sadly, he was unable to win the final tribal council. The person that did, Jenna, clearly knew that he was a bigger threat than Matt, and so she voted him out. It's kind of, it totally would have worked too. It's just the thing is, like, he probably, Matt was such a good ally for him because Matt was really good in challenges. And so it would have stood to reason that Matt could easily win the final tribal council. And then, of course, he would have taken Rob with him. Didn't work out, and as a result, we ended up, instead of having one of the greatest winners of this show, one of the worst. But the die was kind of cast in terms of Rob at that point, and so whenever he came into All Stars, he was the first victim of Boston Rob's brutal regime. There was no way that Rob C was going to be sticking around in that tribe with that Rob was running, because he clearly knew that he was not somebody that he could manipulate, and so yeah, that was it for him that season, and that was it for him in terms of his Survivor career. And so it kind of leaves the question, like, could he keep up with today's ultra competitive and advantage heavy environment, coming from a period before even the hidden immunity idol existed? His performance in All Stars isn't the greatest indicator of that, but certainly Rob C has no shortage of fans, myself included, that would be excited to see him return. And season 50 seemed like it would have been a great opportunity for that. That did not happen, but perhaps someday we will find out the answer. At season 14, or I'm sorry, not season 14, at number 14 on this list, we have Tyson Apostle, who he might be our first four-time player on this list. He played season 18 Tocantins originally, came in 8th place, played season 20 Heroes versus Villains, came in 15th place. Season 27 Blood versus Water, where he was the winner, and season 40 Winners at War, where he finished in 11th place for a total number of 116 days played. Very impressive resume for Tyson. Tyson is a great character because even back in Tocantins, he was immediately one of the most sort of chaotically entertaining and delightfully vicious pieces of that Tocantins puzzle. But it did take him a couple of seasons to hit his strategic stride. He bottomed out in Heroes vs. Villains, where he finished 15th place as really just nothing more than a pawn in Russell Hantz's epic, and I do mean epic, showdown with Boston Rob, which culminated in perhaps the most explosive and incredible tribal council of all time, where he was ultimately voted out in a situation that literally only he and Russell Hantz even understood what happened. But once he got focused in Blood versus Water, thanks to the premature elimination of his then girlfriend, now wife, Rachel, he became one of the best to ever win the game. His gameplay was more subtle than some of the more famous survivors like Boston Rob, but these subtleties were really his greatest strength. He always pretended to give those around him a chance to decide. He was voted off, but in the end, he was the one that was ultimately making the decision every time. And then, of course, he had this great sense of humor and somewhat lovable personality, as long as you weren't on his bad side, like Sierra was on Tocantins. Kind of made him an easy vote for the million in the end, even after he had led the entire jury to the slaughter with a smile on his face and a tongue in his cheek. Like most people cast on Winners at War, he went out early. I guess I should say most of the best people in Winners at War went out early. Although he did fare better than most, considering that he was the first to actually re-enter the game from the edge of extinction. Made it all the way to day 25, 11th place before being voted off again. And he was a legitimate threat for coming back in the second time, which ultimately Natalie Anderson did. But he had a good showing in Winners at War compared to many of the other all-time greats that season, other than Tony, obviously. And then, of course, great winner in Blood versus Water. Super entertaining character both of the other times. Tyson is just an all-time classic Survivor character at number 14 on this list. Up at number 13, we have somebody that it might be controversial for me to have her this low, considering how legendary she is in the canon of Survivor, but I'm putting Parvati Shallow at number 13. She was originally a contestant on season 13, Cook Islands, where she came in 6th. Obviously was the iconic winner of season 16, Fans versus Favorites, was the iconic runner-up of season 20, Heroes versus Villains, and then had a less than iconic run in Survivor Season 40 Winners at War, where she came in 15th place. And then, of course, my understanding, I did not factor that in here, but my understanding is she's the winner of recent season of Australian Survivor as well. So technically a two-time Survivor winner, though we're only giving her credit for one win here. Um, Parvati's an interesting one. I think part of the reason that she's popular is because we've all kind of met somebody who reminds us of Parvati. Maybe not anyone as successful as her. The leader of the infamous Black Widow Alliance from Fans versus Favorites. She is one of the most dangerous to ever play the game. Just because her personality is so infectious, it's hard to sort of bring yourself to work against her. She was obviously extremely attractive, especially whenever she first started playing in the teens of Survivor and of course Heroes vs. Villains. But what made her, I think that's kind of overblown in terms of her success. I think what really made her a great player is her personality, her ability to charm all of her opponents into just this almost stupor, kind of like a Black Widow, I suppose. And it didn't really matter if they were man or woman, it affected them both equally. And so that's why she's so dangerous in the game. I think that she is the greatest social player of all time. And once she was able to learn how to use her personality to her advantage, which she didn't quite master, of course, in the Cook Islands, but obviously did master in Fans versus Favorites and Heroes versus Villains. She made it to the end twice, one of only 5 players in the history of the game to do so, and came extremely close to becoming the series' first two-time winner instead of Sandra. I mean, that's the thing about that final 3 with Heroes vs. Villains, Russell, Sandra, and Parvati is like, clearly Russell wasn't going to win just because of how bitter the jury was. So it's like, man, we're going to have a two-time winner here. It's either going to be Sandra or it's going to be Parvati. Ended up being Sandra, but it could have easily been Parvati too. So obviously just an all-time classic Survivor. Super entertaining, one of the greatest to ever play, no doubt about it. There's just a few people that I just think are more entertaining for me, for my taste, than Parvati. But still, obviously, number 13 on this list, doing very well for herself. Up at number 12, this is definitely, I don't think there's going to be too many lists where you would see this person ahead of Parvati in terms of ranking the all-time greatest survivors. But number 12 is Shane Powers from season 12, Panama, also known as Exile Island, where he finished in 5th. And that was his only season on the show with a total of 33 days played. I think he's got a good claim to being the most unhinged player to ever play the game of Survivor. Brandon Hantz definitely puts a lot of, he'd be a top contender for that title as well, put it that way. But Shane was the single biggest contributor to the whirlwind of chaos that was the Kasaya Alliance on Survivor Panama. And believe me when I tell you that is really saying something, because that entire tribe was a chaotic mess. Quitting his multi-pack-a-day smoking habit, cold turkey, to travel to Panama to compete on Survivor. Shane's sanity quickly began to unravel during the early days of that season, which led to many unforgettable moments in history of the show, from calling a phone-shaped rock his BlackBerry to genuinely yelling at his tribesmates who threatened to steal his thinking stump, to believably threatening to murder a fellow contestant upon their return to the States. I mean, he had it all mapped out and everything. Yeah, all of those things happened on season 12 Panama. And yet, while he was undeniably brash, annoying, out of his mind, he also kind of somehow managed to maintain this certain level of civility and levity that prevented him from going down the path of being what he could have easily been, which is like one of the most hateable Survivor villains of all time with no redeeming qualities, like, a Colton Cumbie or a Brian Heidick. They lacked the entertainment aspect that Shane had, the kind of the heart that Shane had. And this really kind of showed through when later on in the season he's visited by his teenage son Boston during the loved one visit. It kind of grounds the character, it makes him more of a human being. And I think that's very important for why he was so entertaining and beloved. But, it's just the litany of all-time hilarious Survivor moments that he's been involved in that gets him this high on the list. Asking Sari to examine and diagnose his chafing private areas, helping the Medivac team get Bruce out of the game completely naked. Finally getting his hands on a cigarette during a visit to a nearby village. And just like there's this shot of him just sucking on that cigarette like a newborn at the teat. Yelling at his tribe mates whenever he finally gets voted off that he's about to have a chocolate ice cream bar in 1 minute. All these things together, I mean, they just cement him as an all-time great in my eyes. Um, and the thing about it is they knew that he was great, but thanks to and then they wanted to bring him back multiple times, but due to literally a comedy of errors and near misses, he's never returned to the game. He was gonna return on Heroes versus Villains, and then Russell happened. He was gonna return on uh, season 23 South Pacific, weirdly, where he was gonna be opposite coach. Which God bless, can you imagine how entertaining that would have been? But he something happened where he had a personal issue or something like that, and they replaced him with Ozzy. And then he was an option to come back on second chance, and bafflingly, he was not voted back into the game. And so, at this point, it's unlikely that we'll ever actually see him return. But at least we'll always have Kasaya, and they'll never be able to take that away from me. So Shane Powers at number 12 on this list. Up at number 11, we have another iconic winner. This is John Cochran, who originally played in season 23 South Pacific, where he came in eighth, very entertaining eighth. And then in season 26 Fans versus Favorites 2, where he became the second winner to have a perfect game on Survivor for a total number of 70 days played. I don't think anybody has undergone a more dramatic transformation in the history of the show than John Cochran. He kind of starts as like this awkward loser who could barely will himself to take his shirt off in South Pacific, much less stand up for himself in a tribe full of overbearing bullies. But he evolved over the course of his 2 seasons to become one of the season's series best winners, where he clean swept Dawn and Sherry, what's her name, into the final tribal council, capping off, like I said earlier, one of only 2 perfect games in Survivor history. It provided one of the most feel-good moments in Survivor's history for him to just to see him do that over the course of those 2 seasons that were not back to back but very close in proximity, season 23 and season 26. And inspirational proof that, with a bit of confidence and backbone, it's possible to go from mediocre to all-time great. And so I'll always love John Cochran for that. I believe he is my wife's favorite Survivor player of all time. And if he's not, then it's number 10 on my list, which is Ethan Zahn, who she also absolutely loved. The iconic winner of season 3 Africa. He also played in season 8 All-Stars, where he finished 11th, and season 40 Winners at War, where he finished 18th. But a total number of 95 days played due to the edge of extinction on Winners at War. Ethan is kind of the one that comes up whenever people try to say that nice guys can't win the game of Survivor. And obviously, at least in Africa, back in season 3, it was true. It was not. That was not true. That was kind of the most heroic win in history of Survivor. I don't think Ethan had a crossword to say to anybody that entire season. It was an incredibly heroic win, especially considering the dire environment that they found themselves in that season. That was so challenging, where they didn't even have like a good drinking source out in the freaking desert, where they had to put up a fence to protect them from the wildlife. I think you factor all that in, and just the way that he played the game. I think that Ethan is the most heroic winner of all time. He just the dignity, grace, and likability that he had despite those circumstances, I think, is unmatched. He is the holder of some of the most iconic sequences in the history of the show, particularly his escapade with Lex into the African village to sell a live goat in exchange for a plate of French fries. I think that is an all-timer classic of the show, and a great example of something that is missing from the current state of the game. And, Ethan had similar winners equity when he returned in All Stars. He was certainly a threat to win that game. Easily outplayed all the other previous winners during the season, which was impressive considering the strong anti-winner prejudice, I guess, that infected everybody else on the island, particularly Jenna, who was well, not winner Jenna. Was it Jenna Lewis? Yeah, Jenna Lewis, who he was on a tribe with at the beginning of the game, who was in control of his tribe, and still he managed to survive that situation and go over to Mogo Mogo, although he was ultimately betrayed and voted off by his greatest ally that season, Lex Vandenberg, on day 21, which brought a sad ending to Ethan's Survivor career for more than 15 years. He, in real life, unfortunately developed a rare form of cancer called Hodgkin's lymphoma, which ended the hopes, I think, for many people that he would ever return to the game, but beautifully he did return in Winners at War after overcoming that, and clearly the pace of Winners at War was far beyond anything that he was capable of keeping up with. That was very clear from the get go. But his time on the edge of extinction in Heroes of Winners at War really revealed that he was still the same kind of heroic guy that we knew in Africa, despite everything that he had gone through with the cancer and everything like that, and also of course the disappointment and failure that he encountered on that very season. um Again, maintaining a level of grace and poise that really I don't know has ever been replicated in any of the other people that have played the game. I think that there's a solid case to be made that Ethan is kind of the best person to play Survivor, best human being, I guess. So for all those reasons, he's number 10 on this list. I liked him anyway, but the just how much my wife Reagan got attached to him during the early days of watching Survivor is also really near and dear to me. So that kind of pushes him up a little bit and puts him up at number 10. Number 9, we have certainly one of the most iconic winners of all time because it's the original winner of Survivor, Richard Hatch, who won season 1 Borneo. And then, of course, played All Stars in season 8, where he came in 14th place for a total number of 54 days played. It would certainly be impossible to have a list of the greatest survivors of all time without including the winner of the original season of the show. Also, I think that Richard has a claim to be one of the most interesting people to ever play the game. He was really the only one of the original 16 contestants of the first season that actually understood how the game should be played, and as a result, he ultimately set the blueprint for every player that came after him. He is the man that coined the phrase alliance because he's the man who invented the concept for the show. He worked his group of 4 just as easily as he voted out everybody else on the island, and by the time he made it to the end of the game, there was little doubt that he was the one that deserved the title and the money. Although Sue Hawk, in her jury speech, still took it upon herself to make sure that that picture was crystal clear for the jury in a moment that has stood the test of time nearly 3 decades later. Even today, it's one of the greatest winning games ever played, and I think the most important winning game that has ever been played in terms of just the trajectory of the show. If Richard had not won that season, there's a possibility that Survivor would have become more of a flash in the pan, like so many reality TV series that came after it, but instead it became a TV altering phenomenon that we're still talking about all these years later. Hatch had no shot of reclaiming his title as the original winner. Whenever he returned on All Stars, there was a target literally the size of Jupiter on his back coming into that season, but he still managed to be one of the most consistently entertaining people on that season of the show, arguably even wittier and funnier than he was on his entire first outing during the brief time that he was there. Unfortunately, he had this extremely controversial and really kind of disturbing incident with Sue Hawk that really didn't age well in All Stars, and then he also had a run in the law later on in life over his attempt to dodge the taxes that he owed from his winnings on season 1. And I think that those have marred his legacy somewhat in terms of just like his ability to return to the show and just be like this sort of iconic figure that the show holds up. But certainly he is a true original, and I think, an all-time great, obviously. So, number 9 on this list. Number 8, this is also going to be a very controversial pick because this is apparently a very controversial player. But I don't care, it's my list. So, number 8 is Philip Shepard. Philip Shepard, the runner-up of Season 22 Redemption Island, one of the most hated seasons in the history of the show. And the person who came in 10th place in Season 26, Fans vs. Favorites 2, which apparently is also one of the most hated seasons of the show, which I don't understand at all. But he played 67 days in total. As you'll find in the upper echelon of my list, many of my favorite Survivor contestants are of the polarizing variety. Either you love them or you hate them. And I understand that Philip's shtick as the questionably sane former federal agent wore on a lot of people as much as it wore on his tribesmates in Redemption Island. and Friends versus Favorites too, to be fair. But beyond his entertaining antics, which personally I never got tired of, I do think there's a much deeper psychological game being played under the hood of both of Philip's games that truly I find genuinely fascinating. I mean, on the surface, I would argue that Philip is one of the most compelling, hilarious, and just overall entertaining personalities the show has ever seen. His dubious connection with his ancestor Jessamine Herring, his ability to stir up controversy and anger on just about anything from race to rice, his inability to pronounce Francesca, those were all great in my opinion. But over the course of Redemption Island, Philip kind of pulls back the curtain just enough for the audience to reveal that there is actually a method behind, the madness that he's portraying, and ultimately that does earn him $100,000 as the runner-up of the season. His goal was to be disliked and was to be taken to the end of the season by Boston Rob, and it worked. Everything that he tried in the game worked in the sense that clearly he wasn't trying to win because he knew he wasn't going to be able to beat Boston Rob. So he was playing for second place, and he got second place. So that's a huge success for what he was trying to do. What's really interesting, I think, about Philip whenever he returned for Fans versus Favorites 2 is he actually tried to play a much more straightforward, serious game in Fans versus Favorites 2, which I think a lot of people miss. I think that he legitimately tried to step up as a tribe leader, even though I think the majority of the tribe was unable to see past the reputation that preceded him and take him, even sort of seriously. Um, but, his departure that season, I think, is actually one of the more unsung and underappreciated heroic moments of the show where, um, Malcolm kind of has this revolt where he's going to get rid of somebody in the majority alliance, and Philip kind of falls on his sword there. Malcolm is saying, we're going to vote for Philip. And Philip's like, yeah, vote for me. Knowing that he's screwed, but that his alliance members would be able to continue on in the game. And ultimately, that is what happened. And one of his alliance members, John Cochran, ended up having a perfect game. And so, you put all that stuff together, it's just such a fascinating stew, a fascinating collection of funny moments and kind of a lasting, complicated, alienating legacy that Philip Shepard has. And so I love Philip. I'm thrilled that they brought him back for Fans versus Favorites too, even though a lot of people weren't. And I would have loved to see him again, even though I'm sure a lot of people are happy that they never brought him back. So I'm just a huge Philip fan, huge Philip apologist. Sue me. Up at number 7, we have Natalie Anderson, who is the iconic and glorious winner of season 29, San Juan del Sur, and the runner-up of season 40, Winners at War, for a total number of days played of 78. With a maximum of 78 days played between her two seasons and a victory and runner-up finish to her name, it's almost impossible to have a better record than Natalie Anderson on paper. Her first run on San Juan del Sur is maybe my favorite, no, not maybe, it is my favorite winner's arc of all time. She was playing the second iteration of Blood versus Water, where she lost her twin sister Nadia immediately in the first vote, which left her to have to develop bonds elsewhere. She quickly did develop a bond with future winner of the show, Jeremy Collins, which formed what would have no doubt been one of the most dominant duos in the history of the game had his threat level not been detected by the rest of the cast and leading to his early jury elimination. To say the least, Natalie was pissed off about this development and embarked on the greatest revenge tour the game has ever seen, biding her time around some of the most unlikable Survivor contestants in the history of the show, only to blow them out in the end and claim victory. It was glorious, and it saved that season from what would have been, really a pretty rough season of Survivor and makes it an awesome season of Survivor, and it is all because of her. I cannot say enough things about how much I love her game in San Juan del Sur. Coming into Winners at War, things were looking dire for her. She became the first person voted off, but because of the controversial Edge of Extinction and no shortage of fire tokens, she was able to battle her way back. I mean, she completely dominated that portion of the game, battled her way back, and came just a few votes away, and maybe one fire making challenge outcome away from winning again. Can you imagine if she would have won that season as well? I wouldn't even been mad about it. I mean, she's not as great of a winner as Tony is, but I think she's up there and I would have been perfectly that final three. Obviously, Michelle. It's a joke, of course. You don't want to have a second Michelle win, but Natalie versus Tony. What a glorious duo! And I know that's certainly not one maybe that a lot of people were hoping for. Whenever you had a season with some of the all-time greats, most beloved players in the history of the game, which Natalie Anderson and probably Tony are not. But for me, game recognizes game. I loved Natalie Anderson both times. Loved her. Loved Tony, obviously, so I would have been happy with either of those winners. Moving on to number six, we have the original two-time winner of the show, Sandra Diaz Twine, the winner of season 7 Pearl Islands and season 20 Heroes versus Villains. Record kind of falls off after that. She came in 15th place in Game Changers, which was season 34, and 16th place in season 40 Winners at War for a total number of 110 days played. Um, Sandra's so interesting because nobody's going to accuse her of being the flashiest player on this list. She almost never does well in Immunity Challenge. Some argue that she's the worst ever in that category. I wouldn't say that because she has actually won some of them, but um, she's not the best social player. And certainly, she has historically used very little strategy outside of her main calling card of "as long as it's not me," which I would argue is a game-changing innovation that she brought to the game. But for over a decade of Survivor, Sandra had a claim to something that nobody else who had played multiple times could, which was being undefeated. She's, I would say, certainly the stealthiest player of all time, regularly sneaking her way through the bush in order to listen to secret conversations that people did not know that she was listening to. She was just really good at reading people, listening without speaking, but she also knew how to manipulate those around her when she decided to open her mouth. Despite her brash attitude, she became almost a whisper on the island during her first two seasons, particularly on Pearl Islands, where I think people just kind of forgot that she was there until the very end, where they were voting for her to win. Nobody she played with in either of those two seasons considered her a threat until they took her to the end. By then, it's too late. Not only did Sandra win both seasons, she actually had not. My understanding is she had actually not received a vote against her until Game Changers, which that doesn't even make any sense because then she would be. Oh well, okay, no. I think that is true because like no, she didn't clean sweep the jury both of those times, obviously, but she did make it to Game Changers without receiving a vote, which is ridiculously impressive. Obviously, like I mentioned at the top, her last two stints on the show were nowhere near as successful as her first two. They were both early season boots long before the contestants even sniffed the Gemerge or jury phase of the game. And she did have a reputation that preceded her, but even so, her presence on both of those seasons elevated them above what they would have been without her, particularly in Game Changers, where her antics in the pre-merge cemented her status as one of the most entertaining survivors of all time. So, for all those reasons, I have Sandra at number 6, but she just can't quite go up above the other two-time winner of the show, number 5, Tony Vlachos, who was the winner of season 28, Cagayan, 19th place on season 34 Game Changers, but roared back with the victory in season 40 Winners at War for a total number of 84 days played. Tony came in a little bit too late in the game, and I think is a little too derivative of some of my all-time favorites to have him higher than number 5, even though he is obviously a two-time winner. But his status as that two-time winner, including in a season against all winners, gives him a legitimate claim as the greatest to ever play. And if I was looking at a list of somebody who said Tony was number 1, I certainly would not scoff at that. In Cagayan, Tony was already considered an all-time great winner. And it's again kind of not because he didn't make mistakes, but because he was able to recover from those mistakes. I think Jeff Probst said it best whenever he said that Tony made a lot of mistakes, but he was so far ahead of everybody else that they couldn't catch him. He was lapping them, and there was nothing that they could do. And that really came through as a viewer, where his gameplay was so chaotic and haphazard, and just made for unforgettable television. And a big part of the reason, of course, that Cagayan is so beloved. He played very similarly to Russell Hantz, but unlike Russell, was able to retain this sense of likability among his fellow contestants that he was, just running over night after night. He really kind of played in many ways certainly a less loyal and more aggressive game than Russell did, but because of his personality, he was able to recover the sort of bad feelings that you would expect the people that he was playing with to have against him. And That's particularly impressive on his season when which came out in the 20s, which was still a time where I think the show was kind of transitioning away at this time from sort of the putting over importance of loyalty and conservative social dynamics. That was like that was kind of how you won the game at that time. And I think Tony's win was a big part of changing that dynamic and making it to where all out kind of ballsy gameplay was rewarded in the game. And that was really exciting to see develop at that time because I remember watching that season live and just thinking, man, I love Tony, but there's no way he's going to win. Having seen, season 19, season 20 with Russell Haynes. And for him to prove me wrong there, it was like super, super impressive at the time. Granted, coming into Game Changers, his reputation preceded him, which certainly was not helped by his initial decision to run out into the woods and proclaim he was looking for a hidden immunity idol. And so he was voted off second that season. But that humbling experience surprisingly left him in the perfect position to come back in historic fashion in Winners at War, where he managed to restrain himself in the early portion of the game while all of the biggest threats were being eliminated before turning on the afterburners in the second half and delivering another convincing victory and, arguably the most competitive field in history of the game. They're all winners, obviously. So, yeah, just an all-time great winner, all-time great player, super entertaining. Number 5 on this list. Tony, he's just got it all. But up at number 4, we have our first 5-time player of the game that we're going to be talking about today, and that is Sari Fields, who came in 4th place on season 12 Panama, 3rd place on season 16 Fans versus Favorites, 17th place on season 20 Heroes versus Villains, 6th place on season 34 Game Changers, and an unknown place on the ongoing season 50 In the Hands of the Fans. We do not know. As far as I know, she's still in, but we do not know where she will finish up. So she played 121 days coming into In the Hands of the Fans. So obviously it's more than that now. This is obviously a super non-controversial person to have super high on this list. Everybody loves Sari. She's the survivor that famously got off the couch to play the game and forever changed the way it was played thereafter, as arguably the greatest strategic player in the history of the game. She was supposed to be the first boot in Panama, but she somehow managed to navigate the unhinged minefield that was the Kasaya Alliance nearly all the way to the end, thanks to her ability to relate to, clearly, any human being that walks, introducing new strategies like eliminating goats that other players wanted to drag to the end to create more room for herself. After all, who could beat her if she made it to the final tribal council? She didn't have to worry about that. So she's like, the biggest threats to me are the people that people want to take to the end. And then she proved that this Panamanian stint was not beginner's luck in Fans versus Favorites, one of the greatest seasons of all time, when she became the decider, the driver of just about every single vote that went down that season, before ultimately blowing it in the final immunity challenge, which she didn't even think would occur due to the final 3 being suddenly and unexpectedly shaved down to a final 2 that season. Now, I will always maintain that she deserved the million that season over Parvati and Amanda, and maybe she would have gotten it if she made it to the end, but I will admit that, it would have been tough for her to beat Parvati just because Parvati had such a strong relationship with so many people on the jury. But I think that Sari would have deserved it. But because of those back-to-back just like legendary seasons of play, she was voted off early in Heroes versus Villains. Not because she was weak, but which is the reason that she was a threat to be voted off early in Panama and currently in the Hands of the Fans. But because she was the biggest threat in the game, and it still took one of the greatest winners of all time, taking advantage of a split vote and an idle play for her to be eliminated. That was it for her until season 34 Game Changers, which she was one of the few actual game changers that appeared on that season. She was not even voted off that season due to the overabundance of idols and advantages that she did not need to rely on to advance her position in the game. And so she's the only person that's ever been eliminated from the show, to my knowledge, other than, like being pulled for medical evacuations or just being pulled for the game for being an ass. She's the only person that's ever been not voted off because just everybody else had something protecting them, which was frankly an unfair screw job that hopefully she's going to have the chance to rectify on season 50 ongoing now. But of course, coming into season 50, she's coming in as the biggest threat in the game, even over some of the winners that are out there. But it's happened before. And history has shown that you can never count Suri out until her torch is snuffed, which is easier said than done. She's already made it through some pretty hairy situations. Her tribe keeps losing on the current season, so I'm very curious to see how she does in the current season. So that's number four. Number three is another person playing season 50 right now, and that is Coach Benjamin Wade, four-time player of the game, starting in season 18 Token Chains, where he came in fifth. Season 20 Heroes versus Villains, where he came in 12th. Season 23 South Pacific, where he was the runner up. And now, of course, season 50 in the hands of the fans. So he came in with 96 days played, which, of course, is now over 100 days played. Coach is a show stealer every time he's on the television, which is why he's played four times and has now broken the 100-day mark during his stint on season 50. His quote unquote strategy in Token Chains left a lot to be desired, but that's not what he was about. Every confessional, every story, every easily avoidable confrontation with Timbira tribe mates that he has is pure, unadulterated gold, and that's to say nothing of his legendary what he calls the martyr approach to Exile Island, which the producers have said could have probably filled an entire episode of television on its own because of how entertaining it was. He returned 2 seasons later in Heroes vs. Villains, where he was surprisingly a lot more humble and even outwardly insecure, again to hilarious effect. But he was widely outclassed that season by, strategically by tribe mates like Russell Haynes, Boston Rob, and Parvati Shallow. It just barely made the jury, where he would go on to start one of the most hilarious bands to ever walk the earth alongside Courtney Yates and JT on Ponderosa, called the Dragons, like I mentioned earlier. Interesting that all three members of that band are in my top 25 too. But Coach, if we just left it there, if it was just Token Chains and Heroes versus Villains, I think that he would probably still be here. Certainly, he would be in the top five. But his game took this fascinating, hard turn his third time out with South Pacific, where he walked into this tribe as this outcast that they were excited to get rid of, and somehow morphed that into this uncomfortable, cult-like iron grip that he had on that tribe that made him, in my opinion, easily deserving of the $1 million, and took that season from what would have been, maybe an interesting footnote in Survivor history to an all-time classic. It had he won. Sadly, he did not win, and that does kind of hurt the trajectory of that season, I think. But even still, it is kind of poetic for him to lose that season after having such an iron grip on, literally a cult-like grip on his tribe. I think in particular that season, his manipulation of Cochran, who would go on to be one of the most dominant winners of all time, just 3 seasons later, and his ability to convince him to come over to his side and betray his former tribe mates was just super impressive. One of the most impressive bits of persuasion I think that we've ever seen on Survivor, and I think it was just the result of somebody operating at the absolute peak of his game. He may have been screwed by a bitter jury in that season, but he'll always be a winner to me, and no doubt to himself. So I'm thrilled that he's playing season 50. He's been entertaining as hell so far, as kind of washed up coach. And I'm very excited to see where that goes in future episodes. Going on to the runner-up now, number 2 on this list, we have Russell Hantz, who was the runner-up of season 19 Samoa, the runner-up, well, I guess second runner-up of season 20 Heroes versus Villains, 17th place finisher in season 22 Redemption Island, for a total number of 88 days played. Russell said when he played, that he was born to play Survivor. And I think you love him or you hate him. There's millions on either side. There is no denying that he is one of the most influential to ever play the game. Every person that looks for a hidden immunity idol without a clue today does so because of Russell's game-changing decision to do so back in Samoa without precedence. Truly, the game was never the same after his back-to-back run in Samoa and Heroes versus Villains. Other than Amanda Kimmel, Russell is the only Survivor contestant to make it to the end in back-to-back seasons, and he dominated the game in both, dictating not only his path to the end, but also that of the other finalists that joined him in the end both times. There is a fatal flaw to Russell's game, obviously, considering the fact that he has never won, and it's not the one that everybody seems to think it is. It's not this idea that he plays this game with like malice and venom. Um, I do think toning that down would help, particularly in Heroes versus Villains. I think he definitely was. Granted, he was losing it out there playing back-to-back seasons, but I think that he did play an overly venomous game in Heroes versus Villains that pretty much ensured that he wasn't going to win that game. But I don't think that he did that in Samoa. I think that he was actually pretty he obviously played a very loyal game in Samoa, but also I think that he played a pretty low key game socially in Samoa. He wasn't rubbing it in people's faces. He wasn't making like overly flashy plays when he didn't need to. He just did what he needed to do to make it to the end. So that's not, I think, his fatal flaw. His fatal flaw is that he does not understand the social psychology of how juries vote and who he should take to the end. In Samoa, I think Russell could have easily won that game if he'd taken Jason, Mick, Shambo, who betrayed her literally entire tribe and like everybody on the jury, to the final tribal council. But instead, he took Natalie White, perhaps the most liked person on the season, and that cost him $900,000. He made the same mistake in Heroes versus Villains, sitting alongside literally two of the greatest of all time, when he could have been sitting next to Jerry Manthe, Danielle, Courtney Woodcock, or I'm sorry, Candace Woodcock. People that, surely the majority of the people would not have been super excited about voting for. Now, since then, his brief stint in Redemption Island, I know he was on a season of Survivor, the Australian Survivor as well, where he was quickly eliminated. It's clear that he's never going to be able to go deep in the game again now that everybody knows what a threat he is. But doesn't that all it just kind of go to prove that he is one of the all-time greats? I mean, certainly a game changer in the game, one of the most entertaining, I would argue, to play it. The reason that I became a Survivor fan, and for all those reasons, number 2 on this list. But I can't justify putting him above my number 1. My favorite player to ever play. I think there's an argument to be made the greatest player to ever play. Certainly, I think there's an argument to be made the most iconic player to ever play. If you haven't figured it out by now, number 1 is Boston Rob Mariano, who has appeared on a record 6 seasons of Survivor, played as a contestant on 5. That includes season 4 Marquesas, where he came in 10th place. Season 8 All Stars, where he was the runner-up. Season 20 Heroes versus Villains, where he came in 13th place. Season 39 season 22 Redemption Island, where he's the winner, of course. Season 39, he was a non-player mentor in Island of the Idols. Season 40 Winners at War, where he came in 17th place for a total number of 152 days played, not counting Island of the Idols. So many reasons that I have Boston Rob at number 1. I do think he's the coolest person to ever play Survivor. One of the most dominant people to ever play. He's just kind of a total package. He's a challenge beast. He's a great leader. He's a hard worker. He's an all-time great shelter builder. And he's one of the most manipulative talkers and greatest double dealers to ever play the game. Jeff Probst has gone on record to say that Boston Rob is his favorite of all time, which is very clear based on the way that he has reacted to Boston Rob over the years. But I can't blame him. I mean, Rob has played the game longer than anybody else, 152 days, without even counting his odd stint as a mentor on Island of the Idols. He's made it to the end twice, and played arguably the most dominant game in history, the season that he won, where he easily twisted his Ometepe tribe in Redemption Island around his godfather-like figures before picking them off one by one, securing all of their votes for the million along the way. It was basically unopposed that entire season, which I think has turned off many people from enjoying the season on the whole. I always have enjoyed it, not because it was competitive, but because it wasn't. I think it's just kind of satisfying to watch dominant player at work, and there was enough entertaining personalities along the margins that I still enjoyed it. But even before Redemption Island, which is, of course, his most legendary win, and just sort of appearance, I guess, on the show, he was a legitimate game changer all the way back in season 4, where he was the first one to sort of take the strategy of eliminating the tribe's strongest competitor early in the game and aligning himself with easily manipulable, weaker players, which was his goal at the outset. And he was pulling that off, and it was working for him in the pre-merge, and it just kind of caught up with him in the second half of the game. People like Richard Hatch and Jerry Manthe were considered villains before Boston Rob, but I consider Rob to be Survivor's first true villain, intentionally weakening his tribe so that he could rule by fear. Granted, like I said, didn't work out for him in the long run for that season, But he was able to take his game to another level in All Stars, where he ran a similar playbook, backstabbing allies like Lex and turning would-be adversaries like Big Tom and Rupert against each other with a smile on his face, while locking up a runner-up finale opposite his now wife, Amber, who really only won because the jury was so damn pissed off at Rob's actions in the game. So, I almost look at him as a two-time winner, but I understand that technically one-time winner and a runner-upper. Clearly the game has, I think, kind of moved on beyond Rob's sort of mafioso style of play. Winners at War certainly showed that. But the strength of his legacy, I think, remains unimpeachable, and his impact on the game as well is just undeniable. And because you wrap all that around just how entertaining he was, I think that you got to put him at number one. I put him at number one. I know a lot of other people would put him at number one. I don't know. I'm sure there's plenty of people who would not put him at number one, and people got sick of Boston Rob because he has been on the show so much, and I understand that. But it just did. I never got sick of him. I honestly was entertained by him every time that he was out there. Even the blowouts like Winners at War, I still thought that he was super interesting. The brief time that he was there, so. I love Bustin' Rob, and he is my number one survivor of all time. So, wow, this I said that we were gonna have kind of a quicker, breezier episode this week. It didn't end up turning out that way. I had more to say about these players than I thought. But that's it for another episode of Controlled Burns. I will, because I'm updating the list of to 50 players on my website. I probably will do another episode. I know I kind of did them in reverse order, but that was just because I decided to go from the bottom as I made the list on my website. So I think I'll do another episode, perhaps coming up, doing the bottom half of my top 50, so numbers 50 through 26, which is, like I said, kind of a backwards way of doing it, but it's also kind of a unique take. And so, I think that'll be kind of interesting. And, as Survivor 50 is going on, it's like, what better time to rank the 50 greatest players to ever play the game? So I will probably return for that. I don't know if that'll be the next episode or not. We'll find out. But that's going to do it for now. Just a reminder that if you, enjoy the show, you can like, you can subscribe, comment, whatever you can do on your podcast platform of choice. And you can write into the podcast at ControlledBurnes with an ES at gmail.com. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. And until next time, keep it warm.